Now, I'd like to introduce another person who I am very familiar with, Kim Morrison. Kim, if you would like to join us in the virtual stage, we'd love to hear your discussions around Unlisted water rights trading platform, which I'm very, as you know, I'm very interested in anything about water trading. So Kim, please come to the virtual room. We look forward to your presentation. And there he is. Well, over to you, Kim.
Thanks very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's a topic that's pretty hard to cover in the time allowed, but I'll move through this quickly and talk about the Australian water market, which has got a few headlines in Australia recently with the release of the ACCC report last week. So on the first slide, basically to put this in context, I just wanted to illustrate, this is a map of all of the tributaries of rivers in Australia. So yes, to that slide, please. This is a map of all the rivers. And the next slide, this is a map of the ones that have water in it permanently. So you can get a sense from there that we are a pretty water scarce nation. And as a result of that, next slide, please, we have developed a system of water rights across the country, and most of them issued in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, for the bulk of those freshwater rights, which is how we regulate that system. So next slide, please. The scarcity of water in Australia has really driven the regulatory framework that we've recognised as a nation, both across the state governments and as a Commonwealth, that the most efficient way to perhaps allocate that resource against many different competing users is to have a market-based mechanism. So that's what's evolved over the last 20 or 30 years or more, and it has increasingly become more sophisticated through time. And we've been a part of participating in that market, particularly since the period of the mid-2000s, 2005 onwards, when the water rights were separated from land titles, which allowed them to be traded more easily. And the competition for that resource has continued to increase. The Murray-Darling Basin is the largest river system, aggregate system that we have in Australia. It's also Australia's food bowl, accounting for about 60% of our food output. And it's there where we have at present seen a tremendous appreciation in the value of water, which is reflecting that scarcity. So this chart just illustrates over the last 5 years how dramatically some of the values of these water rights have appreciated, reflecting that scarcity, but also reflecting what's been going on with the use of that water. So over that period of time, we've seen quite a lot of capital being invested in the development of new higher value uses for that water. And by that, it's agricultural use. It is transitioning our agricultural landscape away from traditional annual crops towards a greater proportion of water being applied to permanent agricultural crops, particularly to service export markets. So this particular slide just illustrates the growth of the almond plantings in Australia over the past 10 years. And the line indicates what is the value of one of the water rights, which services the main almond area, being the Lower Murray River System water rights in Victoria. What's going on is a transition. Historically in Australia, we grew a lot of annual crops for export, bulk commodity crops like rice and cotton that were really undifferentiated. And over the last 10 years, particularly because of the free trade agreements we've written with Asia and the growth of the per capita wealth in those nations, their demand for Australian produce has increased, and particularly for branded fresh produce that can be landed there with a really controlled supply chain that guarantees the quality of that produce and also its provenance and its authenticity. And so we've then been able to invest in industries like the citrus industry in particular, and table grapes, wine grapes, almonds, in lifting the demand for water at a much higher price and a much higher return for that input than we've had in the past. We've got to a point, though, in some of these regions, particularly the southern Murray-Darling Basin, where in some years the amount of water that might be available may be not sufficient to satisfy any of the annual crops, but even jeopardise some of the permanent crops that have been planted. Next slide, please. So our water fund is something which is investing in this water landscape as far as the water entitlements, providing capital to farmers to be able to then develop these crops and to come up with innovative ways to access water through forward contracting of water, through leases of the water rights over long periods of time, and through carrying over water from one year to the next. While there's been quite a lot of publicity around this in recent years, around the involvement of organisations like ourselves, the next chart illustrates just how small a proportion that we do represent currently. In terms of the total water sales that are going on in the market, it's predominantly a market that transacts between farmers, and independent players like ourselves, as investors long term, are still representing a very small part of that turnover. In terms of the returns that we've been achieving for our investors, they have been substantial. Our target is to achieve about a 10% return, but historically over the life of the fund, we've been able to do quite considerably more than that. The next slide, please. Our fund is an unlisted structure, currently has about $350 million invested. We have a unit price structure with a price determined monthly. We target superannuation funds and high net worth individuals, both from within Australia and offshore, to invest in the fund. And investors can subscribe to participate in that fund on a monthly basis and have the opportunity to redeem from that fund on a quarterly basis at the net asset valuation at the period of redemption. To date, we've had turnover of the fund, which has basically represented about 5 to 10% of the capital each year, and in doing so, have been able to satisfy our investors' requirements for liquidity quite readily. Happy to discuss it with anybody, and you can inquire more at our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. It was great to have your presentation, also validate your role within the larger, trading activity between farmers to farmers.